So hey, there was like a Watchmen TV show, huh? Like, should we do a thing comparing the book and the TV show?
What about the movie?
The what? We should start with the obvious question on everyone's mind for this sequel.
Why did they make this? Why? Why? Ah! Why?
Capitalism recuperates any even remotely popular media and inevitably cannibalizes it, so the blood ritual of sequels, adaptations, remakes, and reboots must be sated. The beast always hungers for more, and it must be fed. 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 And to that end, we can say we were kind of always going to get a Watchmen sequel, and we can imagine getting better ones and worse ones. And the one we got from popular creator Damon Lindelof, who made... What else has Damon Lindelof made? Oh, please God, no!
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain.
You probably want my take up front to know where I'm kind of coming from with this, and, well, I like to extract the positive or interesting messaging that you can get from a piece, and with Watchmen 2019, there is a whole darn bunch to do that with.
Just for a start, the show represents the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre in its opening moments, a historic event that many Americans just don't ever learn about. The show talks about reparations for the history of systemic racism and shows reparations as a real political possibility, which is an exciting step not much other media would take. The critical response has seized on a lot of positives too. It's been hailed across the board as a brave and well-executed work of art that's an essential representation of our time. It is rightfully praised for its largely black cast, its approach to visual storytelling, and again, its depiction of historical events that otherwise would not have been depicted at all.
My brother watched the opening of the show and thought, this is a bit much. And then he went away and found out it's a real historical event. This is something that's a big fucking deal that even in the US, even in Oklahoma, people don't really learn about very much. But what I really can't ignore, what's been holding me back from engaging with the show even, is that it's a huge fucking mess. I'm trying to piece together the useful and good messaging here, and I can't look past these glaring and serious oversights there are. And I don't really know how to write about this, especially when the issues are finicky and nuanced, and there's also so much good stuff to talk about. And that's when my good friend Sarah Zedig came to me with Watchmen 2019 is a dazzling failure, an unfinished script for a video she wasn't going to record, and so I was able to put together my script trying to be desperately optimistic about this show, and her scathing takedown. And that's kind of the video you're watching now, I guess.
One of the most fun things about the original Watchmen is the use of these superheroes who are similar enough to mainstream superheroes so that you get it, while also being different enough to alienate you from caring too much about them. It's a fun exercise in creating these wacky yet believable versions of recognizable heroes, specifically so you can make a particular point. The Degenerate.
I'm gonna stop crime, and then I'm going to an orgy.
Social Distancing Man.
Stop! Don't go to that orgy!
Some kind of bird?
It means that the context we need to talk about the show is less the events of the comic and more the themes. So, to give ourselves the proper context to talk about Watchmen 2019, let's do
a bloody-minded and simplistic rundown of Watchmen brackets the book.
The original Watchmen is really laden with themes. There are, being a little oversimplistic about this, 6 main themes, just as there are 6 main characters. Oh, look at that. Isn't that neat?
First symbolism, the penis. More specifically, the impotent penis. Dan Dreiberg is an impotent character, both in his general life and literally sexually impotent. On the other hand, Night Owl is cool Mr. Gadgets and can do anything. Yes, even that. There's a colloquial sexual use of the word fetish, but the original term has a more broad definition to do with the human tendency to imbue objects with a sort of supernatural power. In the case of Night Owl, his fetish is a metaphor for, his fetish. He can't keep it up if he isn't wearing his superhero gear because he sees himself as only having power, authority, and worth when he's got his special outfit on. Second symbolism. The Silk Spectre is a great name for a character whose mother was the original version of the same hero. Laurie has a Silk Spectre haunting her, both living in her mother's shadow and simply being the token woman in this male-dominated team in this patriarchal world. It's no great leap to point out that both Silk Spectres, and women in general, are treated like total shit in Watchmen. When Sally is nearly raped by the comedian, her boyfriend at the time, Hooded Justice, tells her to just cover herself up. When Laurie first meets Dr. Manhattan, when she's 16, he's there with another woman who he just abandons for her.
Laurie will later be stuck in a loveless relationship with him because she's his only humanizing connection, with nobody to turn to except Dan, fuck me in my owl mask, Dryburgh.
Ozymandias himself is an emblem of a theme, which is kind of the point, right? He's a sellout. There are action figures of Ozymandias on his desk. Ozymandias has obviously been named this by a British anarchist who sees the wealth hoarding of his American businessman character as folly, and therefore named him after the poem, which ends, of course, with the acknowledgement that nothing lasts forever.
Nothing beside remains round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
However, the name also provides a really fascinating character revelation. In universe, Adrian Veidt named himself Ozymandias because he believes he can prove the poem wrong and create a legacy that does last forever. The smiley face, the emblem of the comedian, is a symbol that more or less represents the softening of fascism and authoritarianism, the manufacturing of consent. It's literally a happy face slapped onto a violence-loving maniac as a brand. His smiley face, his edgy, all-a-big-joke nihilism, is a handy excuse not to do the work of confronting his complicity in a horrifying system. The ink blot on Rorschach's mask in stark black and white represents a black and white conservative worldview.
Ironically, the original psychological inkblot test from which he takes his name is all about the extreme subjectivity of human experience, and even more ironically, a lot of people seem to look at this character and read into him what they want to see. More on that later.
Alan Moore wrote Rorschach as a conscious parody of Steve Ditko's self-published objectivist hero, Mr. A right-wing libertarian who rants about money and parasites and productivity. Oh, it sure is hard to see why this guy didn't catch on as a popular kids comic book character.
Money is the tool of exchange, a tool that must first be made before it can be used, begged, stolen, or earned. It has to be made by the productive abilities of men.
You fucking level 1 rookie bitch ass commentators on Twitter, I don't understand it. You not fooling a libertarian by bringing up them bitch ass roads. You think we ain't of all the things that could stump libertarians, which tend to be smarter people, you somehow think that the thing that's gonna stump us and be like, damn, fuck this libertarian shit, is the motherfucking roads. Fuck them hoe-ass roads, man.
Asked later about Rorschach, Ditko acknowledged he was just like Mr. A, except insane.
The clock is very prominent throughout, most obviously referring to the countdown to nuclear annihilation. The clock also ties in with the play on words that the Watchmen are successors to the Minutemen, but they watch as in watching you see? It's all very clever. The urgency of the clock symbol, time's running out, is juxtaposed with the hydrogen atom on Dr. Manhattan, which incidentally looks like a minimalist representation of a clock with both hands on 12. The reason for this juxtaposition ties back to Manhattan's total apathy for the life or death urgency everyone around him is feeling.
Where everyone is saying, we're seconds away from total annihilation, Dr. Manhattan's saying, I'm not sure about that one, Chief, time isn't as linear as you think.
Manhattan is an interesting political metaphor. He simultaneously is an analog for the nuclear bomb, but also by being a person with all that power, he reminds us that the bombs aren't really the problem. The issue is the fallible human beings ready to drop the bombs at a moment's notice. Being a nuclear physicist himself who gains this massive amount of political agency, he could be seen as representative of the age of the expert in politics and the liberal fetishization of intelligence.
Who was Alan Moore? Well, today many of us remember Moore as the father of modern society, who rose from the grave declaring, I am the immortal Yog-Sothoth, share your hoarded wealth or perish, and quickly refigured the entire world order into gay space and narco-communism, before revealing his resurrection, of course, to have been an elaborate hoax. But it may surprise you to learn that before all that, Moore was a humble comic book writer, having crafted many classics such as V for Vendetta, Watchmen, and The Killing Joke, all starring deranged, unhinged, terrifying protagonists who would serve as a useful litmus test for women on dates with comic book fans for decades to come. It's quite well known at this point that Alan Moore surrendered his rights to screen adaptations of The Watchmen, which is why his name doesn't appear in the credits of the show, which you could read as a scathing condemnation. But even if it is Alan Moore right about everything all the time? No! What a stupid fucking thing to say! Get out of my house now! One crucial place where I think Alan Moore is not right about everything all the time is in his recent statement where he said that all comic book media is commercial capitalist propaganda. I think some of it is. I think a lot of it is. I think practically all Marvel movies are exactly that. I also think the gritty realism anti-superhero media put out by DC Comics or Amazon's The Boys is an even more cynical, vapid bunch of trash that's just an attempt to control both sides of the competition, like how Coca-Cola owns Dr. Pepper. But I think that some superhero media continues, as it has always done, to convey genuinely good, politically interesting, systemically critical messages.
Captain America was invented to increase popularity of anti-fascism in America and encourage America to join World War II. The X-Men were created as a civil rights allegory and later helped draw attention to the AIDS crisis.
And I think there are some really solid and good things worth pointing out about the Watchmen TV show. Let's start by talking about something the TV show does really darn well. In the world of the show, of course, which follows on from the book, Rorschach's journal has been published by the far-right rag, The New Frontiersman. Rorschach's journal is basically a manifesto by an angry, violent loner who hates everyone and blames every problem in society on some kind of degenerate filth who are making society worse, and I wonder what the publication of that could possibly lead to. Oh boy! It's white nationalist terrorism.
Rorschach rants in his journal about degenerate filth, and when he talks to Laurie about the comedian, he casually backs down from denying the attempted rape to claiming it was just a moral lapse?
I can't believe I really need to point this out to anyone in the year of our Lord current year, but listen, Rorschach is kind of a bad dude. You're not supposed to like Rorschach.
When Adrian accurately points out the comedian was a bit of a fascist, Rorschach defensively declares that he might as well call me a Nazi too.
You might as well call him a Nazi too!
And then 2 pages later, reflecting on the encounter, wonders whether Adrian is a gay because he's a liberal snowflake who likes nice clothes.
I mean, unless he meant something different by possibly homosexual, must investigate further. Oh, Mr. Rorschach. The thing about Rorschach is his credibility is all in the framing. When you read his words on a page, you do so in a neutral voice.
This city is afraid of me.
It's up to your subjective interpretation. When you see him on screen, he's given a voice by an actor and stylized by...
the Watchmen movie.
So on screen, he sounds like Batman when he says,
And I will look down, and I will whisper, no.
However, when you meet someone like Rorschach in real life, they sound like this.
This is never over! I win! They fucking lose! That's how the world fucking works! Little fucking they get ruled by people like me! Little fucking my ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit! We're gonna win. I rule the fucking world! Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me! They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them!
It's so sad that Steve Jobs died of ligma.
Who's Steve Jobs?
Ligma balls.
Watchmen has always made comparison between superheroes and other forms of law enforcement. Both the superhero team, the Watchmen, and their predecessors, the Minutemen, are named after pre-standardized forms of law enforcement. Even before the TV show just canonized cops as superheroes, the situation with Rorschach was an examination of the mind of a particular kind of person who gets into law enforcement. He didn't go in expecting it to all be sunshine and roses, and he wasn't unhinged by the death of that little girl. He was looking for any excuse to cut loose. The show, in one of its bolder and better moves, gives us a white nationalist gang directly inspired by Rorschach. His journal is their domestic terrorist manifesto. It gives us a police chief with a Klan robe in a secret compartment in his room. It gives us the police from the 40s as widespread corrupt racists who are pretty much all Klansmen behind the scenes.
This brings us to the first really big comparison I'd like to make between the show and the book. The show, for whatever weaknesses it might have, has one really, really big strength: hindsight. The show gets to look back at 35 years of fan reaction to Watchmen and say, wow, people really don't get it when you lay out your ideas with any ambiguity, do they? You give them an inch, they really do take a mile.
I think this is why the TV show holds the audience's hand through so much of its messaging, and furthermore deliberately eliminates so much of the ambiguity in the messaging of the book. Rorschach is a bad dude, and a racist, and a fascist specifically. Dr. Manhattan being a big, smart logic man is a bad thing, and he will eventually give it up. What Ozymandias did was bad, and he should go to jail. Thanos did not have a good point.
It's understandable that the book is so commonly misread in general, considering its complexity and richness. This book is accelerant on the fire of the teenage imagination, and that's a good and a bad thing. In my memory, Dr. Manhattan is a very queer character, and in the book, he's just about one of the straightest characters ever written.
That's a much more me way to misread the character, but I think other people misread Manhattan as a neat, smart dude who has all the facts, and that's really not the point of the character. He's apathetic and distant. It isn't an incidental part of his genius, it's the point. Dr. Manhattan is so distant and apathetic that when Laurie finds out the comedian is actually her father, he just makes the moment all about him and starts talking about thermodynamic miracles, as if that's a thing.
We gaze continually at the world, and it grows dull in our perceptions, yet seen from another's vantage point, as if new, it may
Shut up!
And I don't want to disregard the fact that a lot of the misreading of the original comic comes down to the fact that a large faction of the original fan base are what many people would identify as neckbeards, chuds, gamers. Who were gamers? They were originally referring to people who partook in a hobby known as video game. The word gamers, especially when denoted with a capital G, came to take a second meaning sometime around the mid-2010s. Sources suggest that gamers were a subculture within society, not unlike H.G. Wells' Morlocks, with their own traditions, rituals, and even language.
The following is a demonstration performed by professionals. Please do not attempt this at home.
Cuck.
Cuck.
In the first moments of the show, we see a silent film called Trust in the Law. This is going to be a basic assumption the show is telegraphing it will challenge later on. Trust in the law. In the silent film, a black-clothed cowboy chases a white-clothed white cowboy and pulls him off his horse. Villagers ask, "What are you doing to our sheriff?" And the black-clothed cowboy pulls down his hood, revealing he's also a black man, and then reveals he is the state marshal, and that the white sheriff was actually a crook. The short, silent film is challenging our basic assumption of coding villains and heroes with black and white clothing, and societally doing the same with black and white people. And the movie is in black and white.
The TV show is telling us just about as loudly as it possibly can with a silent movie, this show is going to be about black and white.
Will, the young boy watching the film, is taken by his parents and put on a cart to save him from the horrifying racial attack known as the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the burning of Black Wall Street. He's put in a capsule as his home burns and sent away alone because there's only room for him. Later, he will become the Hooded Justice, the first superhero, after white cops and secret Klansmen he works with attempt to lynch him.
Will Reeves will go on to become a New York City cop and uncover a vast and insidious conspiracy of white supremacy. And can I just say for a minute that when I saw the police do the Cyclops symbol, I sat bolt upright in my seat. I felt like I'd been electrified. It is amazing seeing media acknowledge the creepy and obsessive way that white supremacists create these secret codes and symbols to operate their conspiracies with. This one obviously being a reference to the MAGA dude's OK symbol.
Will's arc concludes with him trying to take down Cyclops and the white supremacist conspiracy, and the white heroes he's teamed up with refusing to help because they simply don't care. Ultimately, Will give up being Hooded Justice after defeating Cyclops, and it's strongly implied that Captain Metropolis replaces him with a different guy of a similar build. Will's story is also paralleled with Angela's, which we learn in the next episode. Her parents are killed in an attack as a consequence of the shittiness of America too, only in this case killed by people resisting the shittiness, specifically freedom fighters against the fictional annexation of Vietnam. Angela is inspired by the Vietnamese police who find her parents killers and becomes a cop herself, although by later adulthood it's pretty clear she at least understands the anti-American feelings. All in all, Angela's arc has many of the same beats as Will's. Her parents die, she's attacked by racists and becomes a masked hero. She becomes disillusioned with heroism after defeating the big bad. The show really spends a lot of time examining one question. From what does heroism arise? The Minutemen TV show that pops up repeatedly throughout the series is a pointedly absurd and trashy telling of the story of Hooded Justice. One character intimately familiar with the history of Watchmen universe calls the show garbage, and we obviously get to see just how wrong it is when Angela takes Will's special pills.
The Minutemen show uses this absurd, hyper-glorified violence in its fight scenes that reads as like a Zack Snyder reference. It's like, you can't see this and not think of 300 or Batman vs Superman.
Or Watchmen. Zack Snyder's Watchmen.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, Watchmen is making like a Zack Snyder reference here. I'm saving my Watchmen movie takes for the Zack Snyder Teardown Patreon goal. So if you want my Zack Snyder takes, patreon.com/CurioVids.
The situations to which superheroes are a response in the Minutemen show are deliberate parody. 4 men with guns go into a grocery store to rob the shopkeeper's safe. Are we supposed to believe this is such a commonplace nightly occurrence that it's worth donning capes and tights and patrolling the streets for baddies to bash? No, of course not. From the Tulsa race massacre to the fictional occupation of Vietnam to the modern day mess of corruption, racism, politicking, internal fighting, and basic incompetence in the police, Watchmen 2019 tells us that heroism arises as an answer to systemic injustice. People get hurt and afraid, and they fight back. Canonizing Hooded Justice as a black man and as a response to the existence of the Klan and police corruption is, for my money, pretty fucking cool. The secret identity of Hooded Justice in the book is himself a racist, and the hood and noose do have a sinister implication because of that. He basically does just look like a Klansman, and I think it kind of fucking slaps that the writers of this show took that and completely subverted it. Then they showed the white folks co-opt the heroism and turn it into a marketing opportunity.
But the show is really, really messy with its messaging about cops, and we need to talk about that. Because on the one hand, it certainly is trying to engage in some kind of criticism of the police. And on the other hand, it does just kind of valorize cops in both its storytelling and its basic assumptions. And on the extra other hand, it's definitely not coming at it from any kind of leftist perspective.
Fucking Nazi! I'm not a Nazi! I'm a communist!
Like, police deadly violence, for example, is an issue that Watchmen 2019 has a really weird relationship with. In the opening 15 minutes of the first episode, a police officer can't get his gun out fast enough because of liberal gun control, so he gets shot. At 2 different points, the show uses the same trick of having Mr. Racism doing a racism monologue, and then blam, gets shot by the hero cop. And in both cases, the past and the FBI, the hero cop is someone who is unrestricted by gun control.
What can I say here except, in the real world, American police not being able to get enough gun is not... It's the exact opposite of the problem.
Repeatedly, the show fails to question its starting assumption that the institution of the police is fine. The problem is just the racists. See, every time a character is unmasked as a member of the 7th Cavalry, they undergo a transformation into a sort of cartoon villain, in one case literally involving a trapdoor under the sofa like Dr. fucking Evil.
The problem with all of this is that it draws a distinction between good people and bad people. It says that white supremacists are deep down just doofus villains who deserve what's coming to them, which, to be clear, I agree with. But it's trying to say white supremacy is systemic, and it actually communicates white supremacy is these guys, and the solution is to just get rid of them.
For all that Watchmen 2019 fixates on racism in America, and despite its acknowledgement of generational trauma, it never once recognizes the fact that racism isn't just a thing that exists. Racism isn't a political affiliation, it's a thing you do for reasons, and those reasons affect all of us. You do not fix racism by getting rid of all the white supremacists, because white supremacists don't exist in a vacuum. They're a predictable result of political and economic forces that are far beyond the scope of any one person's ability to influence or refuse. Also, the cops in the show spend a lot of time beating up on poor folks. It's just that the writing frames it so that they have the handy excuse that those are the bad guys every time. Every time they turn out to be the racists, they turn out to be the terrorists.
I think the issue here is a lack of intersectionality. Watchmen 2019 shows us for sure there are no good billionaires. It's anti-billionaire, but it's not really for poor people. It's mildly anti-capitalist. But it's thoroughly anti-racist, but it's not both. If it were looking at the problems at the intersection, it would primarily focus on the problems at the core of policing as a concept and the history of policing. The history of the first few hundred years of law enforcement in the US and UK reads as just like a laundry list of all the times that some pink-faced dipshit factory owner wasn't paying his workers enough. The union held a strike, and then he called in the police to hand out strict tellings off and skull fractures.
Now, getting really charitable, Will's line near the end,
You can't heal under a mask, Angela. Wounds need air.
is an examination of the consequence-free existence of specifically police in American society. Although it might feel muddled at times, this show really is trying to be critical of policing in general. As with Captain America being written to promote anti-fascist sentiments, the basic form of heroism shown in the show is a reaction to injustice. It comes from a pain that comes from an inability to find justice.
But does the show want to tell us that everyone in a mask is bad? This may be another example of the nuance that will fly over the heads of viewers and will need addressing in the Watchmen VR experience sequel in 35 years' time.
The starting point of the show takes cops and puts them in superhero masks because it's saying that in its purest and best form, policing is heroism. But then it asks from what does heroism arise, and concludes that heroism is just a response to the absence of justice, and therefore a stopgap solution, because you can't just respond to the absence of justice, you have to create its presence. The show has some truly amazing elements, even ones that warrant their own individual deep dive analysis, like Looking Glass. What an amazing character. He's almost like Alan Moore's take on the Joker in The Killing Joke, except that his one bad day turned him into a weird neurotic nerd obsessed with conspiracy theories and mirrors. Oh, and a cop, of course. He's terrified and alienated and wants to keep a barrier between himself and everyone else, and whether he gets over it or not, his life will never not be shaped by the worst thing that ever happened to him. He's just so incredibly human. I love Wade so much, and when I think about him putting tinfoil inside his baseball cap to protect against psychic attacks, I just want to give him a big hug. It's the ending, though, really, that I think needs the biggest, closest, hardest look. Lots of other things can be written off as trying to create the generic Watchmen feeling, or Damon Lindelof just doing a Lost again, or more simply character development rather than thematic meat, but the cliffhanger ending of your show is not a time for you to fuck around when it comes to the subtext. The last few episodes, at least on first blush, dissolve into hyper comic booky nonsense. Dr. Manhattan is Angela's husband, it turns out, but he doesn't remember that, and the Rorschach clan kill him so that a racist senator can gain his powers, but then Lady True, the world's first trillionaire, wants to get his power instead, but they stop her, and then Angela eats an egg containing the Manhattan powers and becomes the new Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan, as I already said, is the folks in charge. He is, in a sense, more the president than the president is. In the original comic, a political pundit says, Superman exists and he is American. It's pretty simple to see a reflection of the very American glorification and even deification of the presidency in this. Manhattan is the people in power who've been elevated so far beyond the concerns of ordinary people that nothing is even remotely real to him anymore. Not even time itself. And then he comes back as a black man. Yeah, I'm saying Dr. Manhattan is Barack Obama. Okay, no, I'm not saying that. The show canonized him as Obama. Will Reeves says right at the end,
He was a good man. I'm sorry he's gone. But, considering what he could do, he could have done more.
and then he winks at the camera and high-fives you, and everyone claps, and Obama was there, and he was huge, and naked, and blue. In the show, Dr. Manhattan is suddenly and shockingly destroyed by the white supremacists. And to be clear, white supremacist dinguses, absolute dipshits that we did not expect to be able to do this.
Do I have to walk us through what the show could be saying with these ignorant white racists destroying the Obama allegory to steal his power? The racist senator they want to turn into their own Dr. Clanhattan even says to Laurie Blake, it's really hard being a white man in America right now.
But then all this is superseded by Lady True the Trillionaire, who wants to seize power because she claims to have noble intentions of fixing the world. But Adrian tells us straight up,
anyone who seeks to attain the power of a god must be prevented at all costs from attaining it.
After Lady True is stopped, the show delivers some exposition about how Dr. Manhattan hid his powers inside an egg, and Angela is going to gain his powers now by eating the raw egg.
Yum 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 yum.
The show takes us right up to the moment of Angela testing her powers and then cuts to black. The cliffhanger, though, isn't whether she gets the powers. She clearly, definitely, obviously, certainly does. It's what she's going to do with the power. The show, to me at least, clearly represents her as liberals on the side of racial historic justice. She's married to the previous leader. She's going to reclaim the power that was taken away from him by the white supremacists. And then Angela is going to get Dr. Manhattan's powers. This is either a proposed solution or being presented as an inevitability.
It's just that with the mess of the whole everything of the show, it's really unclear what Angela will do next. Is she disillusioned with being a cop? Does she still trust in the law? Who knows? I have no idea what the next line is. The aesthetics of the show repeatedly run counter to its messaging here. Everything good Angela does is outside of the law, but at the end of the day, she's still a good guy hero cop. So the aesthetics of the show valorize the police, while its messaging tries to criticize them.
Two perfect microcosms of the aesthetic thematic dissonance are the opening of the show and in Angela's memory travels. In the opening of the show, they depict the Tulsa Race Massacre, which I cannot say enough is a bold and fantastic and important move, but they also actually underplay it a little. Because they want to start the show with this trust in the law assumption, they don't show the white cops during the massacre who were, in fact, in uniform, taking part in the riot, and let me tell you, not helping the black folks out. In Angela's memory sequence when she experienced her parents' death, again, the show parallels it to the massacre, which is, as I said, the same story beat, but it kind of draws a parallel between the Vietnamese resistance and the Klan. Like a line I'm really sure the show doesn't mean to draw, because a minute later they show a deliberate parallel between the police execution of the Vietnamese man and the scene where the white cops try to kill Will. This is exactly why it feels impossible to know what the ending is trying to say exactly. What is Angela's position on all of this? What is the show's position? I can see what I think they're trying to say, but I can also see what the show plainly communicates.
All in all, there's a lot to love about this show. There are fantastic messages and ideas you can extract from it, but that is not what people are going to remember. There are good, solid messages and deep, systemic critique that you can get from this show, and some of that is even the intended messaging, and folks are not gonna come away with those. But, in a way, that kind of makes it the perfect Watchmen sequel, doesn't it?
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. I'd like to start by thanking Patricia Taxon and Bathymetrics for the music that I used in this video, as well as Henry, Jacob, and Matt for giving me their fantastic comic book character voices, and of course Sarah Zedig for helping me write this video, and you, the viewer, for watching all the way to the end. I'd also like to thank my fantastic patrons who make sure I can eat and pay rent and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. If you'd like to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/curiovids and give me $2 or more than $2 to get early access to videos and a bunch of bonus content like outtakes and on-set chatter and even sometimes whole side videos we produce just for patrons. Hope you're all doing okay in the current situation. Be kind to yourself and others, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.